Hi everyone, my name is Ruth and I'll be walking us through the Shibori dip dyeing process today. Fibers dyeing is one of my favorite things to do, and Shibori dyeing is one of my absolute favorite things to do. So I'm really happy to be here and to go through this project with you. Now, shibori dyeing is a traditional Japanese resist dyeing process. It produces these really beautiful, really intricate patterns in fabric. Now, we know that fibers dyeing has been done all over the world and every culture for generations. Shibori is very specific to Japan. They took that dyeing process and really made it their own. The earliest known example of shibori dyeing dates all the way back to the 8th century. So it's this very old tradition that has a long history that's still practiced today. And I think there's something nice about taking part in this old tradition and being a part of history in that way. Now, shibori actually means to wring, to squeeze, or to press. And so it basically refers to how we prepare the fiber for the dyeing process. It's typically done with indigo dye from the indigo plant, from the leaves and flowers of the plant. And so it produces this really rich, really deep blue, almost purple color. And these are a couple examples of traditional shibori folds and traditional shibori dyeing. You can see the deep colors in blue, but also that variation that appears and some of the patterning that can happen. It's really beautiful, and you can see why it's one of my favorites, right? Now, I know shibori may not be a word that we're familiar with, but I'm sure we all know tie-dye, right? Tie-dye is a pretty common dyeing process. Typically, it's done where you twist the fabric, usually a t-shirt, you twist it up, and then you tie it with string or rubber bands, and then you add a variety of dye to it. And so when you open it up, you see these beautiful rainbow colors in a spiral pattern, right? We've all seen that one. Shibori is a little more detailed and a little more intricate, right? There are a variety of folds that you can do. And if you look in your illustrated instructions, there's a page on shibori dip dyeing that has some examples of the most common shibori folds. Now, we're going to be doing a version of this today. We'll be doing one of the typical folds, but we'll be dyeing it in a slightly different way. Let's talk a little bit about some of the supplies that we need. Let me move these out of the way. Of course, the first supply we need, that we'll always need, are illustrated instructions. We'll be doing number 2, the shibori dip dyeing. And as with all illustrated instructions, we have a list of the supplies that we need at the top, and then step by step, how to do that process. And I'm going to kind of guide us through it today, but if this is a process that you enjoy, you now have the recipe card, so you can do it again. So pull out your illustrated instructions. The next thing we need is going to be our tea towel. This is the fiber that we're going to be dyeing today. It's 100% cotton. Whenever you do any kind of dyeing, it's good to use natural fibers. So 100% cotton, 100% silk, 100% linen. Those are going to be the best ones to use. We're using 100% cotton today, and it's going to give us a nice, beautiful color. You can still use blends or synthetics to dye, but you won't get as beautiful or as rich a color as you would with natural fibers, right? So we're going to use our tea towel today, our 100% cotton tea towel. The next thing we need is going to be our dye packet. So in your kit, it'll look like this. It has a little sticker in it that says Dharma Trading. This is the company that we use for all our silks and all our pigments. They're really great. They made this packet for us. We've got three pigments in there. You have a yellow, a cobalt blue, and a fuchsia. The cobalt blue is similar to the indigo, the traditional indigo dye, so that'll be a fun one to use today. But go ahead and pull your pigment pack out. If this is a process that you enjoy and you want to do some more dyeing, definitely reach out to Dharma. Their website and phone number are right there, so you'll be able to order more pigment from them. And the pigment that we use is listed right here. So we'll pull that pigment out. We'll use that today. The next thing you'll need are going to be the disposable gloves. Now, this may be in a small Ziploc bag, but you want to pull out the disposable gloves today. Because we're working with pigment, we want to make sure we protect ourselves. And so having those disposable gloves will protect our hands when we're using that dye. I do want to say that if you do get that pigment on your hands, it will come off with a couple washings. That pigment is not meant for skin, so it's not going to stay. It may discolor you for a little while, but if you wash your hands a few times with regular soap and water, it'll come out. But we do have some disposable gloves that we'll use today. We also want to pull out our popsicle sticks. Because we're using powder pigment, we're going to mix it with a little water. And so we need our popsicle sticks to kind of help mix that pigment in. And then we'll also need that little bundle of silk, the silk ribbon. We're going to be dyeing this today, but we're going to be using it for one of our weaving projects later on. So go ahead and pull that out. Now, there are a few things that we need that are not in the kit. The first one is our bowl of water. Now, I'm using just a regular kind of to-go Tupperware bowl. You don't need a big one. You just need one that's big enough to hold your fiber so it can pre-soak. And we'll talk about pre-soak in just a minute. But go ahead and find that little bowl. Next, you want containers for the dye. Now, I'm using just a regular blue cheese Tupperware and a egg drop soup, I think, Tupperware are the two that I'm using. Just disposable containers. I've used this a couple times for the dye, and you can see it doesn't quite stain it at all. So using something like this is really good for that mixing the pigment. You'll also need some water. And if you have white vinegar is a good thing to add in. Now, when we do the pre-soak, we'll use water. The pre-soak is meant for opening those fibers up so it's ready to take the dye. The white vinegar is really helpful. It's not necessary, but it's really helpful. It's like a helping hand for the pre-soak process. It helps those fibers open up and helps latch on to that dye. So if you have white vinegar, definitely pull that out. But if you don't, it's totally okay, not necessary. So again, what we need are going to be those containers for mixing the pigment, the popsicle sticks to mix the pigment in the containers. We'll need the disposable gloves to protect our hands. We'll also need the silk ribbon, the tea towel, cotton tea towel, the pigments, and then our bowl of water for the pre-soak. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as we're getting started, I want to mention protecting our space. Usually when I do any kind of dyeing process, I like to protect my space just a little bit. And how I do that is usually by putting a piece of foil, a piece of wax paper, maybe some newspaper down, because I want to protect my space. And usually when I do put something like that down, it helps me contain the dye. Now, if you do get dye on your workspace, it's okay. Wipe it up quickly and it won't stain. If you do get a hint of a stain, it comes off with a little soap and water, so it's not permanent. However, this dye was made for fibers. So if you get it on your clothes, it will stay. So it's always good to wear clothes that you don't mind getting a little messy or an apron. I will almost always wear black whenever I do dyeing. It's because I'm a messy person. And when I wear black, you can't see how messy I am. So wearing black is a good idea, but also wearing an apron is really helpful. So like I said, when I prepare my space, I usually do a piece of foil. And so I've got that today, a piece of foil that I'm going to be working off of. So let's go ahead and get our pre-soak going. I'm going to take my bowl and I'm going to add about 2 cups of water. We don't need a whole lot. We just need enough water for our fiber. Right. So let's go ahead. If you have the vinegar, I have some vinegar, so I'm going to go ahead and add that in. If you have the vinegar, add a little vinegar to it. With the 2 cups, I'm going to do about 2 tablespoons. We don't need a whole lot. It's just a little helping hand, right? So once you get your pre-soak water set up, let's go ahead and add that tea towel. So I'm going to go open mine up and then scrunch it up. And add it to the pre-soak. I think my tea towel might be a little bigger than my bowl. As I said earlier, you don't need a whole lot of water. You just want to have enough so that fiber can start opening up, right? So I'm adding that in. I'm also going to add in my silk ribbon. Add that in too. All right, we're going to set that aside and let that pre-soak. Okay. So if we look at our illustrated instructions, right, we've gathered all our supplies. We're starting with that pre-soak. Now, pre-soak usually happens, the average is about 10 to 15 minutes. I'd say as long as you're within the 5-minute to 30-minute range, you're good. So we're going to let that pre-soak for just a little bit. We don't need a whole lot of time. We need just enough time so those fibers are opening, right? So we'll do that pre-soak. And while it's pre-soaking, let's go over to step 2. We're going to start pouring the pigment into the bowls and adding the water to it, mixing it up. Right? So in your pigment pack, you have 3 colors. You have a yellow, a blue, and a pink, right? I'm going to do 2 colors today. Not going to go crazy, but feel free to do all 3 colors, to do just 2, or even do just 1 color. It's up to you. I'm going to do 2 colors today, though. So the pigment packs that you have are 1 ounce. That's a lot of pigment. We're not going to use all of that today. So if this is a process that you enjoy, you'll be able to continue it on and make more dye and do more dyeing projects. All we need for today is going to be about 1/4 teaspoon, right? We just need a small amount. We're dyeing the tea towel and the silk, and so we don't need a whole lot. That pigment is really concentrated, so just a little bit goes a long way. So what I'm going to do about 1/4 teaspoon and dump it in my bowl. And you can see it's not a large amount at all. So I'm doing the pink, and I'm going to do the blue today as well. And I'm doing those 2 only because it's a little easier to see on camera. So I'm going to get the pink. I've got that in my bowl. I'm going to grab the cobalt blue. And I'm going to do the same, about 1/4 teaspoon. Right? You don't need a whole lot. Like I said, a little bit goes a long way. And so we have a small amount. And you may have noticed that you have a lot of pigment left in that bag. Like I said, using just a small amount is enough. So you'll be able to do dyeing projects again. Now, with the containers that I have, with about 1/4 teaspoon, we're going to add about a cup and a half of water. So I'm going to add some water in. And you can see that pigment is already starting to turn. About a cup and a half. Now the water we want to use is not cold water. You want to use either room temperature water or warmer water. And so this is where those gloves come in handy. So go ahead, we're going to start some mixing, but let's go ahead and put our gloves on. All right. So once you have your gloves on, I'm going to take one of my popsicle sticks and I'm going to start mixing the dye, mixing that pigment into the water. And you can see that pink is a really nice color, right? So go ahead and mix it in. You'll see little kind of balls of pigment that's not quite mixed in. And we just want to make sure all that pigment is mixed in. It may take a minute, but just take your time mixing it in. I know sometimes the dyeing process can be a little messy, but as long as we're taking our time with it and we're aware of our space and aware of our body, accidents generally don't happen. So just being aware of what we're doing and where our hands are can help quite a bit. So I think my pink pigment is good. So I'm going to take it and turn it around. I'm going to mix in my blue now, my cobalt. You can see that deep blue is very close to the traditional indigo color. Actually, this looks like it's pretty mixed in too. Just go ahead and mix that pigment, make sure it's nice and mixed. Like I said, it may take a moment to make sure everything is mixed in, but it's worth it to take the time now. I think we're pretty mixed in. All right. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and set that pigment aside. Right? I'm going to move that. over there for just a moment. So what we're going to do is now we're going to pull out our fiber and do our shibori folds. So go ahead and set your pigment aside, and let's go ahead and get our tea towel out. Now we're using cotton, so it's really great at soaking up a lot of water. So we want to squeeze out as much as we can. So it may be harder with the cotton. We want it to be damp, but we don't want it to be dripping. So squeeze it out as much as you can. Like I said, it may take just a minute. All right. And then I'm going to squeeze out that silk too. Okay. Once we do that, we're going to start that fold. Now I'm actually going to take my gloves off to do the folding, but feel free to keep yours on. I'm going to put the gloves back on when we go back to the dye. But let's start our fold. I'm going to move the camera up just a little bit so you can see more of how I'm folding it. But let's open up that tea towel. It's a pretty good sized piece of cotton. So it'll take a lot of that dye, right? So let's go ahead. We've got our tea towel, and let's go ahead and start those folds, right? So what we're going to do is an accordion fold. This is one of the examples that's in the illustrated instructions for the different types of shibori folds that are out there. And it's the traditional way that we're going to be doing it today. So you can see with the illustrated instructions, we're going to lay it out and accordion fold it into a line, a straight line. And this is like we're making a giant cloth paper fan, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to accordion fold it all the way down. So let's start off with that, just accordion folding. And it doesn't have to be big folds. I'm going to fold mine, let's say about 3 inches. You can do it larger or smaller. However you want to do it is good. But make sure it's folding all the way down. And then instead of folding it over, we're going to fold it back. Remember, we're making that accordion fold. So we're going to fold it back this way. So we have this kind of zigzag shape we're making, right? So we did that first fold. I'm going to fold it under like that. Make sure it's folded all the way down. And we're just going to keep doing that all the way across, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, just kind of generally the same in size. And we'll just keep doing that back and forth. Still that accordion fold. So it's kind of that zigzag paper fan shape. Okay, and you can see mine doesn't go all the way to the end, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think there's a lot of beauty that comes from the little imperfections that come from this practice. So again, we're just going to make sure those folds go all the way down, right? It may take a little adjusting because it is such a big piece. So if you're working on a table, that's probably a better space. I know the table I have is kind of small, so it's not doing well. But once you have that fold all the way across, right? Right. We're going to look at our illustrated instructions. So we folded it one way. We have this long strip of the accordion fold. We're going to turn it and fold it again till we make a little square. Right. And so here we go. I'm going to kind of fold the end here to a square shape. And so it's about like 3 or 4 inches, just a little square. Again, yours can be bigger or smaller, but we're going to do that accordion fold again. right? So you can see that zigzag shape. And take your time with it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going through making that zigzag shape. So we have that zigzag, right? We have that accordion fold. So now we've got our square. And this is a good starting place for us. We'll use that for the die, but go ahead and set that aside and let's pull out our silk ribbon. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the silk ribbon. And we're going to kind of fold it in a different way. We're going to just wrap it around our fingers. So I'm right hand dominant. So I'm going to do the wrapping with my right hand. And I'm going to use my left hand to hold it. So I'm going to put my fingers together on my left hand. And with my right hand, just wrap that silk around it. It doesn't have to be super tight. What we're doing is just kind of wrapping it up so we can dip it in the dye. It doesn't have to be super straight. It can be a little twisted. That's okay. Again, we're just kind of making it a little more manageable for that dyeing process, for that dip dyeing. Okay, so we have our Shibori folded tea towel. We have our bundled silk. Those are the things that we're going to be dyeing today. So let's go ahead and pull that pigment back out. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my gloves back on. And I'm going to kind of zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing. Right? This is a good time to put the gloves back on. So let's stick our gloves back on and we'll start dyeing again. Okay, so we're going to start off, again, this is the messy part, but as long as you have your foil, you're aware of your space, aware of your body, it's usually pretty easy to keep it contained. I will say again, if you do get some of the pigment on your skin, don't worry, it won't hurt you. It'll come off in maybe a couple of days, but it'll come off with a couple washings of soap and water. If you get it on your workspace, just wipe it up quickly. It won't stain. If there is a hint of stain, it'll come off again with a couple washings of soap and water. This also won't stain your sink. But again, if it does, just a few washings of soap and water will get it off. But be aware of your clothes because it will not come out of your clothes. So let's go ahead and start our dyeing process. I'm going to move my silk onto here, but I'm going to take my tea towel. Okay. And so what we're going to do, actually probably bring this up a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to dip the corners into the dye. I'm doing two, so I'm going to alternate. I'll do blue, pink, blue, pink, but feel free to do it which way you want. This is where some creativity comes in. So you can do pink on two sides, blue on two sides. You can do all three of your colors, alternate. Whichever you want to do, it's really good. So I'm going to start off. By dipping one of my corners in the pink, right? So I'm just dipping that corner in. And I'm going to give it a little time to soak up that dye. Not too long, but you can see it's already starting to soak it in a little bit, right? Just going to give it a little more time. And you see it's doing a really nice color. Just letting it soak in. It doesn't have to be too long, like I said, just a little bit. And then what we're going to do, be aware of your space when you're doing this, is squeeze it out. So I'm just going to squeeze some of that excess dye back into the pink dye bowl, right? We're going to get some of that excess dye out. And like I said, this is the messy part, but as long as we're aware of our space and we're taking our time with it, we should be okay. So now that I've got some of that nice pink color, and you can see that it's starting to soak through nicely, I'm going to go over to my blue dye. I'm going to do the next corner. And I'm going to dip it in that blue. And again, leave it for just a moment, but you can see that blue is starting to soak up. And that's what we want. So I'm going to let that blue in there for just a moment. Let it soak. Not too long. And then I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to squeeze it also. Squeeze that blue dye back into the pigment bowl, right? Okay. So now I've got two corners. I have my pink corner and I have my blue corner. And you can see the really nice transition that's happening between the pink and the blue. We're getting kind of a purple in there. And so that's nice to see. So I did a pink corner, a blue corner. I'm going to go back to my pink and dip the next corner in that. So dipping that into the pink, letting that soak up. Again, not too long, but we want enough time for that pigment to really soak into the fibers, right? We did that pre-soak that helps open those fibers up. So it's ready to take the dye. And now we're going to let that dye kind of soak in. Once you've let that soak up, once again, squeeze that out. Squeeze that pigment out, that excess pigment, back into the pink dye bowl. Okay. So now I have two corners of pink. I have one corner of blue. I'm going to go to my last corner and add some more blue. Now, again, I'm just doing the pink and blue, but feel free to do all the colors, all three of the colors or two like I am. We're going to let that soak in. And you can see how messy my space is getting. So it's good to have that piece of foil that you're working on or disposable tablecloth. Sometimes when I do this project with kiddos, I do it outside. So it's not as messy inside. And then once I leave that in the dye for a bit, I'm going to squeeze out that excess dye. And so I have my corners of pink, my corners of blue, and I have these lovely transitions of purple that are happening, right? So now I can see those colors blending through. What we're going to do is set that aside. Okay. So I'm just going to let it rest over there. Whenever we do a dyeing process, there are a couple times we have to wait. One is for the pre-soak. You want to make sure that you're giving enough time to that pre-soak so those fibers open up. The second thing is after you add the dye, you need to let it rest. And this gives the dye time to hold on to that fiber, right? So we're going to let that rest for a bit. I'm going to go over to my silk bundle. And you see I've already got a little pink on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my pink dye and dip half of it in the pink dye. Let that soak in. We don't need to do it for long, but once we get that dipped in there, go ahead and wring that excess dye out. And so we have that nice piece of dye. I'm going to hold it and go over to my blue, my next color, and let it soak in for a bit, and then wring it out. Okay. So I have a two-tone silk. We'll be able to use this for weaving projects or like the fabric wrap jewelry, some other projects that we do in this series, but it's nice to have like a little hand-dyed piece of fabric that we'll use. So now we've got the wait time, like I was saying. I'm going to pull my gloves off. This is always a really fun project for me to do. There's something really nice about dyeing my own fibers. These make some really great gifts. You can do this for so many things. I did a tea towel with it today, but you can do like a tote. You can do an apron. You can make do curtains with it, a tablecloth. You can be creative with what you do. This process is easily replicatable. And so you can do it in a variety of ways. And you have plenty of extra dye now that you can continue that process on. This dye that we're using right now, it'll be good for a couple days. So you're more than welcome to do some more dyeing. Maybe you have a t-shirt, a cotton t-shirt that you want to dye, or a placemat. Go ahead and let that pre-soak, and you can do the dyeing just like we did this tea towel. So we're going to let that tea towel sit. We're going to let it sit about 24 hours. If we look at our illustrated instructions, after we did the fold, we did the dipping process, right? That next step is to let it dry completely before unfolding. And so what we're going to do, since this is cotton, we're going to let it dry about 24 hours, fold it up like this, and then we're going to open it up and let it hang dry the rest of the way. Okay, so let it dry 24 hours, then open it up, hang dry it, and let it dry completely before you heat set it. Now, when I say heat set, what I'm talking about is adding a little heat to it to help that dye latch on and stay with that fiber. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can do it by throwing it in the dryer for a couple minutes, letting that heat hold on to that dye. You can use a steam iron. You can use a steamer. I use a steamer for a lot of what I do. You can even use a blow dryer for a bit. It may take a little longer, but you want to heat up the fabric enough that it latches onto that dye. And then once that heat sets it, you're able to use it as you normally would a tea towel. I do want to do a little bit of a caution. The very first time you wash it, after you heat set it, you may get a little transfer. So be careful what you wash it with that first time. But it should be pretty good and it should be pretty lasting. I'm going to set this aside for just a moment and show just a quick example of what it might look like when you open it up. These are ones I've dyed previously. You can see it's that same way, the blue and the pink. After it dried for 24 hours, I hung it up to dry. It only took about a day. And then I had this really beautiful resulting pattern. Right? So that Shibori fold gives us this kind of almost star pattern, square pattern that's really nice. Yours may turn out differently, and I think that's wonderful. We all do the same process, and it's still, there's a surprise at the reveal of what it actually looks like. We can do the same process with the same exact colors and still get very different results. But this is an example of what one might turn out. Now with the silk ribbon that we had, you open that up and we have this multicolored ribbon that we'll be able to use for our weaving now. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at our contact@mather.com, or you can reach out to us on our Facebook page. Feel free to post pictures. I absolutely love seeing all the work that everyone's doing. Thanks so much for dyeing with me, fiber dyeing with me. Happy crafting, everyone, and we'll see you soon.